Wait, don't scroll. This is the video you've been waiting for. If you're tired of forgetting everything you read, you're in the right place. I'm about to show you how to break the cycle of forgetting and finally remember every single thing you learn. Before you do anything else, grab a pen and paper, or even better, save this video now because you'll definitely want to watch it again. This isn't just another study hack, it's the breakthrough you've been searching for. So pause your scrolling and get ready to transform your memory for good. There's hardly anyone who hasn't experienced this. You study a chapter over and over, feeling excited and confident that you've mastered it. Then, when you try to discuss it with friends, you suddenly freeze mid-sentence, the idea you were eager to share vanishing into thin air. Meanwhile, a classmate chimes in and effortlessly finishes what you were trying to say. When you ask how they remember so easily, they say something like, "I just picture the professor's lecture. I never even reread the chapter." And you're left wondering, if you attended that lecture and reread the material countless times, why do you still forget? At that moment, it's easy to feel dumb and believe you have a terrible memory. But no, your memory isn't broken at all. In fact, forgetting is completely normal. Over a century ago, Hermann Ebbinghaus became the first to study the science of forgetting. By repeatedly testing himself, he discovered what we now call the forgetting curve. His findings revealed that even the brightest students lose a significant portion of what they learn. According to his research, within an hour of studying or receiving a lecture, you forget 50% of the material, about 70% after a day, and nearly everything by the end of the week, unless you review the material before it slips away. That's why those naturally gifted students who seem to remember lectures effortlessly aren't superhuman at all. They simply know how to revisit the material at just the right time, and that's why they remember better than other students. I'll show you exactly what they do that helps them remember so well. But first, let me share the stupid mistake I made in school. A mistake that had me glued to my books, missing out on parties, and even the chance to ask a girl out, all in a misguided effort to beat my own forgetfulness, only to end up with average results. You see, we often fall into the trap thinking that more studying automatically means more learning. So we spend countless hours buried in our textbooks, convinced that studying more is the secret to getting good grades, because that's what everyone tells us to do. I was no exception. I dedicated all my time to reading, sacrificing my social life in the process. Week after week, I'd study a chapter meticulously, only to find that by the next day, it was already slipping away from my memory. So I'd read it again, and when exams rolled around, I'd have to reread the entire material because I'd forgotten it again. My results didn't reflect the endless hours I spent studying. The only subjects where I saw a difference were the ones where I didn't just read. I also tested myself with questions. That's when I discovered the one aspect of studying that most people overlook, and yet it's the most important aspect: testing. I know, most students hate testing. I did too, until I realized it was the only proven way to combat forgetting. So before you rush off to watch a few more YouTube shorts, let me show you how incorporating testing into your study routine can actually help you remember what you learn, so that you too can finally beat forgetting once and for all. This is the forgetting curve, and it shows that when you initially study, you absorb new material, but almost as soon as you finish, you forget a large chunk of the material. However, if you test yourself on the material, something remarkable happens. The curve begins to straighten. The more tests you take, the less you forget, and the curve flattens even more. When it eventually becomes a perfect horizontal line, you've reached the point where you'll remember that material forever. If you spend most of your study time simply reading and not testing yourself, you're not studying smart. I've seen students who barely read at all, yet by focusing almost exclusively on testing themselves, they consistently earn top grades. This isn't just a quirky observation. It shows that testing is the secret to getting more A's. But here's the catch. There's a proper way to test yourself. Do it wrong, and you're only wasting your time. There are 3 ways to test yourself effectively. First, when you study something today, immediately create questions or flashcards based on the material. You can even use AI, upload your notes, and let it generate questions for you. Use these questions to test your understanding right after you study. And don't limit this to just after study sessions. After a lecture, challenge yourself to recall what you learned. Even pausing during your study session to mentally review what you've just covered can make a huge difference. Studies have shown that testing yourself in this way can boost your test scores by up to 50% after just 1 week. Second, avoid the mistake of testing yourself while still looking at your study material or notes. If you're using a study aid that shows both questions and answers on the same page, cover the answers before you start. This way, You're not simply reading the answers off the page, you're retrieving them from your own memory. It's vital to know exactly what you remember on your own and where you need to improve. Another key point is that when you make the effort to recall information from your brain, your mind takes that as a signal to store the information for longer. It's not just important to test yourself, it's the act of recall itself that makes your memory stronger. That doesn't mean you should never consult your notes. Instead, first, try to recall the information independently, then check your notes to see what you missed. You might think that testing yourself like this is stressful, but compare it to simply rereading an entire material every single time you forget a small portion of it. With testing, you only go back to learn what you couldn't recall, which means you're actually studying less and having more time for fun activities. This brings me to the third crucial point. You must test yourself repeatedly to remember long term. However, don't overwhelm your brain by testing yourself 100 times in one go. What works best is spacing out your tests over time. This way, testing becomes your method for reviewing your notes and lectures. Research shows that the optimal moment to review is when you're on the verge of forgetting the material. At that moment, your brain works harder to remember, and by forcing your brain to work harder at that precise moment, you solidify the memory even further. In other words, when your testing is spaced out, it effectively stretches the forgetting curve, helping you remember the material for a much longer period. Consider this. If you read something today, the forgetting curve suggests you might lose about 70% of that information by tomorrow, leaving only 30% retained. But if you test yourself on the same material the next day, your retention goes up to 100%, and you will still remember 60% 7 days later. Then, say you take a test again on that 7th day, your retention goes up to 100% again, and you might still remember 70% after a month. You can see that when you test yourself at intervals, you're automatically slowing down forgetting. Nothing like walking into the exam and suddenly realizing that you can't remember most of the things you've read. Testing lets you know what you can remember and what you can't. No surprises in a test or exam. Now, talking about exams, say you test yourself once more after a month. You can see from the graph that you could still remember 80% even 3 months later, meaning that just 3 well-timed tests could be enough to keep the material fresh in your brain right up to exam time, proving that effective testing isn't nearly as difficult as it sounds. Now, if you want to space your reviews out correctly, here's a suggested timeline by experts. After your initial study, your first review should be 1 day later. Second review, 2 days after the first review. Third review, 4 days after the second review. Fourth review, 7 days after the third review. Fifth review, 14 days after the fourth review. Sixth review, 32 days after the 5th review. If keeping track of all these intervals feels overwhelming, try the Spaced Learning app by rickham.dlf, the very tool I rely on to space out my review sessions effortlessly. App link in the description. The app is simple to use. When you study something today or take a lecture, simply record it in the app and it will automatically schedule your recall sessions on the app's calendar. Every day, check the app to see what you need to review and let it guide your study sessions for optimal retention. That's it for today's video. Don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Share this video with your friend who reads and forgets. Subscribe to this channel for more study videos like this one. See you in the next video.